Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us today. We have a brand new story to share with you, so let's get started. I arrived home earlier than planned, the dull ache behind my eyes from a long flight pressing against my skull. The midday sun reflected off the pristine stained glass windows of my grandfather's estate, a house that had been in my family for generations. I had inherited it after his passing, a final gift from the man who taught me everything about resilience, power, and legacy. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a symbol of everything I had worked for. And yet, as I pulled into the long circular driveway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A woman stood near the front steps, dressed in an elegant white blazer and sleek stilettos, her phone pressed to her ear. A black luxury sedan idled nearby, its driver leaning against the hood, scrolling through his phone. I frowned. This wasn't a social call. And then I saw the clipboard in the woman's hand. Real estate documents. I killed the engine, my heart hammering against my ribcage as I stepped out of the car. The woman turned at the sound of my heels clicking against the pavement, her red painted lips parting slightly in surprise. "You must be Mrs. Carter," she said, offering a polished smile. "I'm Maggie Holloway from Elite Properties. I'm here for the final walkthrough." Final walkthrough. The words bounced around in my head, nonsensical, absurd. Walkthrough of what? I asked, my voice measured, steady. Years of boardroom negotiations had trained me well. "The estate, of course," Maggie said, tilting her head in polite confusion. "Your husband, Mr. Carter, scheduled the appointment this morning. The buyer is on their way." I felt the world tilt on its axis, the ground beneath me suddenly unsteady. My husband, Daniel, the man I had trusted, the man I had built a life with, had done the one thing I never thought possible. He had put my house up for sale. "I see," I said smoothly, forcing my lips into a practiced, unreadable smile. "Please come inside." Maggie beamed, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I unlocked the front door, my grip on the keys so tight my knuckles turned white. As I stepped into the grand foyer, the familiar scent of aged mahogany and lavender filled my lungs, grounding me. The crystal chandelier overhead cast shimmering prisms of light across the polished floors, a breathtaking display of my grandfather's legacy. Maggie let out a low whistle. "Absolutely stunning. The listing photos didn't do it justice." Listing photos. I filed that detail away for later as I guided her into the sitting room. "How long has the house been on the market?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Just under a month. Mr. Carter was quite motivated," she said. "The price point was aggressive, but it attracted immediate interest." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. The estate was worth over $10 million in today's market. How much had Daniel been willing to sell it for? And why was he in such a hurry? My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Daniel, right on schedule." I ignored the call. Instead, I reached for my attorney's number. Sophia Ramirez picked up on the first ring. "Olivia," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "I was just about to call you." "Let me guess," I said, keeping my eyes on Maggie as she ran her fingers along the intricate moldings. "You've had some interesting paperwork cross your desk." "More than interesting," Sophia said grimly. "We need to talk, now." Before I could respond, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of the house. A woman stepped out, tall, poised, exuding quiet confidence. Something about her was familiar. Maggie turned to me, beaming. "Ah, here's the buyer now. Dr. Evelyn Chang." The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. Why did I know that name? As Dr. Chang's eyes met mine, something flickered behind her gaze. Not just curiosity, recognition. And that's when I knew. This betrayal ran much deeper than I had imagined. Dr. Evelyn Chang's gaze met mine with a knowing sharpness, her expression unreadable. I had expected to see the usual interest of a wealthy buyer, but there was something else, something that sent a warning bell ringing in my gut. I forced a smile, extending my hand. "Dr. Chang, welcome," I said smoothly. Her handshake was firm, professional, but brief. "Mrs. Carter," she replied, her eyes flicking to Maggie. "I assume everything is in order?" I didn't let my smile falter. In order? Hardly. My husband had tried to sell my home behind my back, and now I was standing face to face with a buyer whose name felt important, but I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it before. "Why don't we take this conversation inside?" I suggested. Maggie beamed, completely unaware of the underlying tension crackling between us. "Of course! Dr. Chang, I think you're going to love the library. Gorgeous original oak shelves, perfect for a collector." Dr. Chang followed me into the estate, her sharp gaze taking in every detail as we walked through the grand hallway. The air inside felt heavy, charged with an unseen force, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the sky. "So, you're a doctor?" I asked casually, leading them past the sweeping staircase that curled up toward the second floor. "A neurosurgeon," she confirmed, "but I also have an interest in historic preservation." Neurosurgeon. The word hit like a trigger. That's why I knew her name. I had read about her months ago, an award-winning surgeon, but also a relentless advocate against corporate fraud. She had exposed a major hospital scandal involving stolen research funds and illegal property transfers. What was she doing here? "And what drew you to this property?" I asked, carefully watching her reaction. For the first time, her polished exterior cracked, just a flicker of something deeper. Was it hesitation or recognition? "My mother was a historian," she said finally. "She used to tell me stories about the significance of estates like these. I've been looking for something meaningful. A lie. Or at least not the whole truth." I nodded, filing that away for later as I guided them toward the sitting room. The walls here were lined with portraits of my family, generations of Reynolds staring back at us. Dr. Chang's eyes lingered on them for a second too long. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Daniel. The rage that had been simmering beneath my skin ignited like a lit match. He had spent weeks lying to me, maneuvering behind my back, and now he had the audacity to check in? I declined the call without hesitation. Dr. Chang's lips twitched at the motion. "I take it Mr. Carter is unavailable for today's meeting?" I turned to fully face her, holding her gaze. "He's under the impression I'm at the spa." A beat of silence. She understood what I was really saying. Maggie, still oblivious, cleared her throat. "Well, shall we discuss the final steps of the transaction?" "I think we should hold off on that," I said smoothly. Maggie frowned. "But—" "Dr. Chang," I interrupted, "you're a woman of detail. I imagine you research every investment thoroughly before making a move." Her eyes gleamed with something close to amusement. "I do." "Then I assume you know this estate was never Daniel Carter's to sell." Maggie's face paled. I don't understand." Dr. Chang exhaled slowly, crossing her arms. "I suspected as much." I arched a brow. Suspected? Now she was the one being tested. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Your husband's listing price was far below market value. It caught my attention." She glanced at the room around us. "And I recognized this house. More importantly, I recognized your name." I stiffened, my mind racing. She had been trying to contact me, but Daniel had intercepted every attempt. Dr. Chang continued, her voice softer now. "Mrs. Carter, I believe we have more in common than you realize." Before I could demand an explanation, my phone buzzed again, a message from Sophia, my attorney. "Olivia, it's worse than we thought. Daniel didn't just list the house, he forged signatures. He's stolen millions from the estate's holdings. Call me. Now." I looked up to find Dr. Chang watching me carefully. "You already knew," I murmured. She didn't deny it. Instead, she said, "I came here to stop it." And just like that, I knew Daniel's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was part of something much, much bigger. The weight of Dr. Chang's words settled over me like a heavy storm cloud. I had been so focused on my betrayal, Daniel's deceit, his attempt to sell my grandmother's estate out from under me, that I hadn't stopped to consider the full scope of what I had walked into. But now, standing in the grand sitting room with Dr. Chang's sharp gaze locked on mine, I realized I wasn't the only one who had been watching this unfold. Maggie shifted uncomfortably beside us. I don't understand. What do you mean, stop it?" I turned to the realtor with a forced smile. "Maggie, why don't you take a moment, get some air?" She blinked. "But this isn't a misunderstanding," I cut in, my voice smooth but firm. "This is fraud, and I think, Doctor, Chung and I need a moment alone to discuss what happens next." Maggie hesitated, glancing between us, but something in my tone must have finally registered. With a reluctant nod, she backed toward the foyer. "I'll just give you both a moment." The second she disappeared down the hall, I turned back to Dr. Chang. "Start talking." She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I've been investigating a pattern, high-value properties tied to family trusts that suddenly appear on the market under questionable circumstances. Every case had forged documents, hidden financial transfers, and offshore accounts. Each time, a husband or business partner orchestrated the deception, ensuring the rightful owner never realized what was happening until it was too late." My pulse quickened. "And Daniel, he fits the profile exactly," she confirmed. "This estate wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a targeted move." The floor beneath me felt unsteady. "So, you weren't looking to buy the house?" Dr. Chang's lips curled slightly. "I was looking for you." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about power, about wealth that men like Daniel thought they could steal without consequences. I crossed my arms. "And what exactly do you get out of this?" Her expression didn't waver. "Justice." I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. "And how do you suggest we get it?" Dr. Chang's eyes glinted with something sharp. "I assume you haven't confronted him yet." I shook my head. "Not directly. He still thinks I'm at the spa." "Good." She turned slightly, glancing toward the window, where Maggie paced outside on the porch, nervously scrolling through her phone. "That means we have time to set the trap." I arched a brow. "A trap?" Dr. Chang leaned in slightly, her voice dropping lower. "Men like Daniel don't just fold when caught. They fight. They manipulate. They try to weasel out of consequences. But if we let him think he's still in control, we can make sure he walks right into his own downfall." I felt a dark, unfamiliar satisfaction curl in my stomach. I wanted him to squirm. I wanted him to know exactly how it felt to be powerless. "What do I have to do?" I asked. Dr. Chang smiled. "We make him believe his plan is working." Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Daniel stormed in, his eyes darting around wildly before they locked onto me. His expression was a perfect mix of shock and barely restrained panic. "Olivia," he breathed, as if seeing a ghost. "What are you doing here?" I forced myself to remain calm, plastering on a sweet, almost amused smile. "I could ask you the same thing." His gaze flickered to Dr. Chang, who stood beside me, perfectly composed. "Who's she?" "A potential buyer," I said, tilting my head. "One who seems to know a lot about you." I watched as the color drained from his face. He knew. He knew he was caught, but he didn't yet realize just how deep the knife was about to go. Daniel's face twitched, just a flicker of movement, barely noticeable. But I caught it. He was calculating, trying to piece together just how much I knew. He forced a chuckle, stepping forward with that same practiced charm that had once made me trust him. "Olivia, sweetheart, what is all this? A misunderstanding? You shouldn't be here, love. I was handling everything." Handling everything. The words sent a spike of rage through me, but I kept my expression neutral, my lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, I'm sure you were." I stepped aside, letting him see the property transfer documents still clutched in Dr. Chang's hand. His eyes flicked over them, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. His mind was racing now, scrambling for a way out. "You know," I mused, pacing toward the grand bay window where the sun cast golden light over my grandmother's beloved garden. "It's funny, I thought today would be relaxing, a massage, a facial, maybe some quiet time, but instead—" I turned, meeting his gaze with deliberate slowness. "I come home early and find a real estate agent giving a final walkthrough of my house, a house I never put on the market." Maggie, the realtor, who had lingered near the door, flinched at my words. She had clearly realized she was in the middle of something much bigger than an ordinary sale. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Olivia, please, let's talk." "Oh, let's," I interrupted, my voice laced with mock enthusiasm. "Because there's so much to discuss, like how you managed to forge my signature, or how you thought I wouldn't notice millions of dollars quietly disappearing into offshore accounts." I folded my arms, my voice turning colder. "Or how you intercepted calls from potential buyers who were actually trying to reach me." His face paled. "Gotcha." I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. "Tell me, Daniel, did you actually think I was that stupid? That I wouldn't check my own legal documents? That I wouldn't notice you setting up shell companies in my name?" Dr. Chang finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "You underestimated her. That was your first mistake." Daniel turned to her, eyes narrowing, his mask slipping just enough to reveal frustration underneath. "And who the hell are you?" She smiled, unfazed. "Someone who's been watching you and others like you for quite some time. You fit a pattern, Mr. Reynolds, a very predictable one." His fists clenched at his sides, his carefully crafted persona crumbling by the second. "This is ridiculous. You're making it sound like I planned all of this." I let out a slow, sharp laugh. "Oh, Daniel, you did plan this. The problem is, you didn't plan it well enough." Silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of the truth. He knew there was no easy way out of this, but then, just as I expected, he did what men like him always do when they're cornered. He switched tactics, his expression softened, his shoulders slumping just enough to seem defeated. His voice dropped to something softer, something that might have fooled me once. "Olivia, I made a mistake." He took a step forward, lowering his gaze as if ashamed. "I was desperate. You were so focused on your work, on your grandmother's legacy, and I wanted to build something for us. I thought if I handled the sale myself, I held up a hand. "Don't." He froze. I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen under glass. "You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught." A muscle in his jaw twitched, his true self slipping through the cracks. Dr. Chang crossed her arms unimpressed. Do you really think she's going to fall for that? Maggie, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, suddenly cleared her throat. Mr. Reynolds, I think I should leave. You're not going anywhere, Daniel snapped, turning toward her. I stepped between them. Yes, she is. Maggie hesitated only a second before grabbing her bag and practically bolting for the door. Smart girl. I turned back to Daniel, lowering my voice to something dangerous. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down. You're going to explain everything, every account, every forged document, every detail of this little operation of yours. He sneered, his fake remorse melting into something uglier. And if I don't? Dr. Chong pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Then the authorities will be very interested in our evidence. Daniel's face twisted in realization. We had him. Completely. For the first time, he was the one out of moves. Daniel stood there, shoulders squared, fists clenched, his once perfect composure shattered. He was still trying to calculate an escape, but there wasn't one. Not this time. I had him cornered. I don't know what you think you have, he spat, his voice dripping with forced arrogance. But you're making a huge mistake, Olivia. I didn't respond immediately. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, one I had carefully prepared in advance. With a slow, deliberate motion, I opened it and spread the documents across the polished mahogany coffee table. Daniel's breath hitched, his signature, forged, his offshore accounts, tracked, the phony business names, exposed. Dr. Chong stood beside me, arms folded, watching Daniel with the same clinical detachment she might use for a failed medical experiment. Everything is here, she said coolly. Every document, every fake transfer, every shady transaction. Do you really want to sit here and pretend you still have a way out? Daniel licked his lips, his confidence faltering. This won't hold up, he stammered, though the words lacked conviction. You can't prove Oh, but I can, I cut in, my voice deceptively soft. And I'm not the only one who knows. The banking authorities have been alerted. The real estate board is investigating, and let's not forget the police. I gave him a knowing smile. Fraud is such an ugly word, don't you think? His eyes darkened, darting between me and Dr. Chong, weighing his options. I could see his mind working, running through every possibility. He could deny, he could argue, but he couldn't erase what was already documented. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel had no control. Then, just as I expected, he tried his final move. He lunged for the documents. His hand barely brushed the papers before I slammed my palm down over them, stopping him cold. Try that again, I said, my voice dangerously low, and I'll make sure your next conversation is with a detective. His chest heaved, his nostrils flaring. He was cornered, and he knew it. But men like Daniel never go down quietly. His lips curled into a snarl. You think you're clever, don't you? I leaned in slightly, my voice a whisper of steel. No, Daniel, I know I am. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Dr. Chang glanced at her watch. You have two choices, she said, her voice as calm as ever. You can cooperate and make this easier on yourself, or you can fight it and lose everything. Either way, this sale isn't happening. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed. Oh, I do, I countered smoothly. See, I learned from the best. My grandmother was a master at spotting liars. She always said the most dangerous people are the ones who smile while they're stabbing you in the back. I let that sink in for a beat before continuing. You spent years convincing me I was lucky to have you, that you were my partner, that we were building a life together. But all along, you were plotting your exit, your payday. Daniel looked away, jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "You thought you could take everything from me," I murmured, watching him carefully. "But you never realized I was watching you the whole time." His hands curled into fists, but I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was the one holding the cards now. "Now," I said, stepping back, my voice sharp. "Here's what's going to happen." Daniel looked at me, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. "You're going to sign a confession admitting that you attempted to commit fraud." I pulled out a blank statement and a pen, setting them down in front of him. "Or you can wait for the police to knock on the door. Your choice." His eyes widened, flicking between the paper and me. "You wouldn't," I smirked. "Try me." The silence stretched longer this time. Daniel's breathing was ragged, his pride battling his fear. Then, finally, he reached for the pen. His hands shook as he signed his name. I watched every stroke of the pen with a satisfaction so deep it felt like victory. He had no idea what was coming next. The moment Daniel's pen scratched against the paper, sealing his fate, I exhaled slowly. The confession, his admission of guilt, lay between us like a ticking time bomb, primed to explode at any second. His face was a mask of fury, his lips pressed into a tight line as he shoved the document back toward me. "There," he spat. "Happy now?" I picked up the paper, scanning his messy, frustrated signature at the bottom. It was the first honest thing he had ever given me. "Not quite," I murmured, carefully folding the document and tucking it into my purse. "But it's a start." Daniel's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. He was used to control, to being the one who set the rules, manipulated the pieces, and walked away unscathed. But this time, he was the pawn. "You're going to regret this, Olivia," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous warning. I only smiled. "No, Daniel, you are." A knock on the door made him flinch. It was time. Dr. Chang remained still, watching the scene unfold with the same detached curiosity she might show a particularly fascinating medical anomaly. As I moved toward the door, Daniel stepped in front of me, his body blocking my path. "Who is that?" His voice was tight, his confidence cracking. I tilted my head. "Why don't you open it and find out?" For a moment, I thought he might run. His eyes flicked toward the back door, the windows, calculating escape routes. But he knew, just as I did, that he was out of options. His fraud, his betrayal, his greed, it had all led him here, to this moment. With slow, reluctant steps, he reached for the doorknob and pulled it open. Standing there, expression unreadable, was Rebecca Monroe, my attorney and my grandmother's most trusted legal mind. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds," she greeted coolly, stepping inside. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers followed, their badges glinting under the chandelier light. Daniel's breath caught. "You called the police?" I took a step forward, closing the space between us. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" He turned back to Rebecca, his voice dropping into a pleading whisper. "This is a mistake. She's setting me up." Rebecca didn't even blink. "The only mistake here is yours, Mr. Reynolds. Fraud, forgery, attempted grand larceny, not exactly minor offenses. You signed a confession, and the authorities will be very interested in that." Daniel turned to me then, his eyes burning with hatred. "You were never this smart," he seethed. "Someone's been helping you." I smiled, stepping aside so that Dr. Chang was fully in view. "You're right, Daniel. I had help." His face contorted, realization dawning like a distant thunderstorm. "You..." His voice cracked as he looked at Dr. Chang. "You were never here to buy the house, were you?" Dr. Chang smirked. "No, Mr. Reynolds, I was here to bury you." The officers took their cue. "Daniel Reynolds," one of them said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and attempted real estate theft." Daniel staggered back, his arms tensing, but before he could do anything, the officer was already pulling out handcuffs. The cold metal snapped shut around his wrists. "You can't do this!" he roared, thrashing as the officers restrained him. "I built this life. No, Daniel," I interrupted, my voice calm, controlled. "You built a lie, and now you're finally paying for it." As they led him away, his face twisted with rage and desperation, I felt an unexpected sensation. Relief. The man who had spent years trying to steal my life, my inheritance, my trust, he was finally gone. Dr. Chung turned to me, an eyebrow raised. "Satisfied?" I let out a slow breath. "Not yet," I admitted, watching the flashing red and blue lights outside. Because I knew Daniel Reynolds, and something told me this wasn't over yet. The weight of Dr. Chang's words settled over me like a heavy storm cloud. I had been so focused on my betrayal, Daniel's deceit, his attempt to sell my grandmother's estate out from under me, that I hadn't stopped to consider the full scope of what I had walked into. But now, standing in the grand sitting room with Dr. Chang's sharp gaze locked on mine, I realized I wasn't the only one who had been watching this unfold. Maggie shifted uncomfortably beside us. I don't understand. What do you mean, stop it?" I turned to the realtor with a forced smile. "Maggie, why don't you take a moment, get some air?" She blinked. "But this isn't a misunderstanding," I cut in, my voice smooth but firm. "This is fraud, and I think Dr. Chang and I need a moment alone to discuss what happens next." Maggie hesitated, glancing between us, but something in my tone must have finally registered. With a reluctant nod, she backed toward the foyer. "I'll just give you both a moment." The second she disappeared down the hall, I turned back to Dr. Chang. "Start talking." She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I've been investigating a pattern, high-value properties tied to family trusts that suddenly appear on the market under questionable circumstances. Every case had forged documents, hidden financial transfers, and offshore accounts. Each time, a husband or business partner orchestrated the deception, ensuring the rightful owner never realized what was happening until it was too late." My pulse quickened. "And Daniel?" "He fits the profile exactly," she confirmed. "This estate wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a targeted move." The floor beneath me felt unsteady. "So, you weren't looking to buy the house?" Dr. Chang's lips curled slightly. "I was looking for you." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about power, about wealth that men like Daniel thought they could steal without consequences. I crossed my arms. "And what exactly do you get out of this?" Her expression didn't waver. "Justice." I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. "And how do you suggest we get it?" Dr. Chang's eyes glinted with something sharp. "I assume you haven't confronted him yet." I shook my head. "Not directly. He still thinks I'm at the spa." "Good." She turned slightly, glancing toward the window where Maggie paced outside on the porch, nervously scrolling through her phone. "That means we have time to set the trap." I arched a brow. "A trap?" Dr. Chang leaned in slightly, her voice dropping lower. "Men like Daniel don't just fold when caught. They fight, they manipulate, they try to weasel out of consequences. But if we let him think he's still in control, we can make sure he walks right into his own downfall." I felt a dark, unfamiliar satisfaction curl in my stomach. I wanted him to squirm. I wanted him to know exactly how it felt to be powerless. "What do I have to do?" I asked. Dr. Chang smiled. "We make him believe his plan is working." Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Daniel stormed in, his eyes darting around wildly before they locked onto me. His expression was a perfect mix of shock and barely restrained panic. "Olivia?" he breathed, as if seeing a ghost. "What are you doing here?" I forced myself to remain calm, plastering on a sweet, almost amused smile. "I could ask you the same thing." His gaze flickered to Dr. Chang, who stood beside me, perfectly composed. "Who's she?" "A potential buyer," I said, tilting my head. "One who seems to know a lot about you." I watched as the color drained from his face. He knew he was caught, but he didn't yet realize just how deep the knife was about to go. The weight of Vincent Caldwell's words settled over me like a suffocating fog. My name. On those documents, a fraudulent transfer of assets, but in my name. I forced myself to keep breathing, to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was spiraling. How had he done it? Rebecca's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning each line with growing horror. "Catherine," she murmured, This makes it look like you were in on it." My stomach twisted. That was the point. Vincent gave a slow, measured smile, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who had never lost a game in his life. "Daniel played his part well, I'll admit. But me?" He tapped the folder. "I played to win." Dr. Chang took a step closer, her eyes sharp, her presence a silent warning. "You forged these," she stated, voice controlled but lethal. Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh no, Doctor, the beauty of this? I didn't have to forge a single thing." He reached down, plucking a single sheet of paper from the pile. "Daniel was sloppy, but you?" He flicked the document toward me. "You were predictable." I hesitated before picking it up, and then my blood ran cold. It was my signature. Perfect. Identical. But I had never signed this. My throat tightened. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this had happened. And then it hit me. Daniel, all those months he had insisted on handling things for me, screening my paperwork, keeping me too busy to go through the details. He had collected copies of my signature, dozens of them. He didn't need to forge anything. He just had to repurpose my real signature on something I never saw. Vincent must have seen the realization dawn on my face because his smirk deepened. "There it is," he murmured, pleased. That moment of clarity. Dr. Chang folded her arms. "And what exactly do you want?" Vincent sighed, feigning disappointment. "You wound me, Doctor. I merely want what's owed to me." Daniel was set to liquidate my investment. He gestured to the house around us. "This property, this little inheritance of yours, I have a claim now." I set my jaw. "You have nothing." Vincent tilted his head. "Is that so?" He nodded toward the folder. "Because, from where I'm standing, your name is on every piece of incriminating evidence. The fraudulent transfers, the offshore accounts, the wire instructions. If the authorities see this..." He let the implication hang in the air. Rebecca stiffened. "You wouldn't." Vincent shrugged. "Would I?" Checkmate. My mind raced. He had me in a corner. If I fought him, he'd bury me in fraud allegations. If I let him take the house, I'd be surrendering to a man just as corrupt as Daniel, except he underestimated me. The mistake all men like him make. I forced myself to exhale, let the fear slip away, and met his gaze with calm, unwavering confidence. "You came here expecting me to panic," I said. His smile twitched slightly. Just slightly. "But you didn't do your homework, Vincent." I walked around the desk, stepping toward him. He didn't move, but I saw his fingers flex slightly, as if he was resisting the urge to adjust his cufflinks. Good. I was making him uncomfortable. I gestured toward the folder. These documents, the wire transfers, the accounts? I smiled. Rebecca caught on instantly. They're already flagged, she finished smoothly. We have everything logged with federal authorities. Vincent's smile faltered. Just a fraction. Dr. Chang nodded. The moment you try to push this, they'll dig deeper. And something tells me, Mr. Caldwell, that you don't like people digging into your affairs. His fingers curled into a fist. Bingo. I stepped closer, dropping my voice to a whisper. You can walk away, right now. Disappear. Because if you don't... I leaned in slightly, so only he could hear. I burn everything you've ever built to the ground. Silence stretched between us, then a flicker. Something dangerous passed through his gaze. Amusement, then something colder. I held my ground. For the first time that night, Vincent was the one forced to make a choice. His lips curled into something between amusement and irritation. You really are your grandmother's granddaughter, aren't you? I smiled. You have no idea. A long pause. Then, without another word, Vincent turned and walked toward the door. I didn't move, didn't exhale, not until I heard the quiet click of the front door shutting behind him. Dr. Chang let out a breath. That was a gamble. I nodded, but he blinked first. Rebecca ran a hand through her hair. We need to move fast, lock down every asset, scrub every connection, make sure he can't retaliate. I sat back in my grandmother's chair, the weight of the night crashing over me. Vincent Caldwell had walked away for now, but I knew men like him. He wasn't gone. Not really. And this? This was only the beginning. The silence after Vincent left felt deafening, but I knew better than to mistake it for peace. This wasn't over. Men like him didn't just walk away. They regrouped. But neither did I. I wasn't the same woman who had blindly trusted Daniel, who had assumed loyalty meant safety. I had seen how easily a man could smile while stealing everything from me. And now, I was ready for them. Rebecca and Dr. Chang wasted no time. Within hours, every account was locked down, every property record secured. The federal authorities had already been tracking the fraud, and now, with Vincent exposed, they had even more to work with. I sat in my grandmother's study, watching the first rays of morning light spill over the oak desk she had once ruled from. For the first time, I understood her in a way I never had before. She had built a fortress, not just of wealth, but of foresight. And now, I was ready to do the same. The lesson. Betrayal isn't just personal, it's a strategy. The people who smile the widest can be the ones plotting your downfall. But that doesn't mean you let them win. What do? You learn. You get smarter, sharper. You let them think they have you until it's too late for them to run. Vincent and Daniel thought they could erase me. They thought I was a pawn. But what they never realized is that I wasn't playing their game. I was writing my own. And if there's one thing I've learned, the best revenge isn't just taking back what they stole. It's making sure they can never play the game again. Want more? If you loved this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Men's Cheating Story for the next explosive chapter. What would you have done in Catherine's shoes? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk betrayal, karma, and the ultimate payback. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.